James Smith remained in Congress for several years, where he was always active and efficient, and by his cheerful and interesting stories, he dispelled the loss of courage and hope, which he often saw all around him.
James Smith.
James Smith.
James Smith.
James Smith was born in Dublin, Ireland on September 17, 1719. He immigrated to Cheshire County, Pennsylvania with his family when he was 10 or 12 years old. His father was a successful farmer, and James benefited from a good, simple, classical education. He excelled in the art of surveying, which at this period of time in the country was a very useful thing. He later studied law and became a lawyer and a surveyor, and he continued the practice of those professions for the remainder of his life. He attended a provincial assembly in 1774, where he was appointed to a committee to come up with a plan to stop importing any products from Britain. He presented a paper he had written called Essay on the Constitutional Power of Great Britain over the Colonies in America. Whew. The essay suggested a boycott of the British goods and a general congress of the colonies as measures in defense of the colonial rights. Well, later in that year, he organized a voluntary militia. It was a company in opposition to the armies of Great Britain, and they elected him as their captain. His company, 1 to 200 men, later grew to be a battalion, 500 or more, at which point he deferred the leadership to a younger man. He was still appointed their colonel, but the title was honorary as he never assumed the actual command. James was appointed to the Provincial Convention in Philadelphia in 1775, where he stated, quote, "If the British administration should determine by force to effect a submission, we hold it our indispensable duty to resist that force at every hazard to defend the rights and the liberties of America," unquote. A greater portion of Pennsylvania were strongly opposed not only to war, but even to the idea of a Declaration of Independence. James Smith was elected to the Continental Congress in 1776. He arrived after July 2nd vote for independence, but he still arrived in time to place his signature on the document on the 4th of July, 1776, at the age of 56. James remained in Congress for several years, where he was always active and efficient. And by his cheerfulness, he dispelled the loss of courage and hope, which he often saw around him. In 1778, he resumed his professional career, being no longer interested in a political career. James had served in many public offices, one term in the state assembly, a few months as a judge in the state high court of appeals. He was reelected to Congress in 1785, but declined to attend due to his advancing age. Little is known about his professional work because a fire destroyed his office and his papers in early 1806. And later in that same year, James died on July 11th, 1806, at the age of 87. Charles Augustus Goodrich writes of James Smith, "In his disposition and habits, Colonel Smith was very peculiar. He was distinguished for his love of anecdote and conviviality. His memory was uncommonly retentive and remarkably stored with stories of humorous and diverting character, which, on occasion, he related with great effect." In other words, he was a fabulous storyteller who could lighten a heavy situation with an interesting story. The end.